I'm Yossi Kuperwasser. I'm the new head of the institution here, and the institute. Freimin Bar is sitting with us here. I just replaced him. And we have with us Dr. Ran Lerman and Mr. Ran Segev and Adi. And we should be joined immediately by Eitan Shamir, the head of BESA. And we are here to listen to Professor Edward Luttwak, who doesn't need any introduction, in fact, but we are going to speak about the strategy of what's going on in the Middle East by President Trump and by Israel and by the other players here, Iran and so forth, and who can be a better speaker on this issue but the person who wrote the book about the grand strategy, about the strategies of the Roman Empire. So I think that
Byzantine
and Byzantine,
more relevant.
the Byzantine Empire, which is even more relevant. And everybody can be envious of us because we are going to be able to speak about more details about it with Professor Luttwak later on. But I want to start it with asking this question, which bothers, I guess, many of us. Is there a grand strategy here with what Trump is trying to achieve in the Middle East?
Well, there is most definitely a grand strategy in what Trump is trying to achieve globally. In regard to the Middle East, I'm not sure that one can speak about grand strategy as yet, but I think it's most useful just to say what Trump is trying to do generically in the Middle East. The generic thing Trump is trying to do is trying to re-industrialize the United States, to make the United States an industrial country again. Because as you know, globalization took the form of moving industries from the United States to all other parts of the world. This was supervised by Wall Street that did this operation. And what they got out of it is that these countries that are newly industrialized, they all buy US Treasury bonds in order to improve the exchange rate. That is to make their currency cheaper in order to be able to export more products to the United States. And this resulted in a very happy situation for Wall Street and for everybody else who is an investor and for customers, because you went and you Walmart and you bought a shirt made of pure Egyptian cotton for $15 and so on. So it was really wonderful. In Europe, you pay 80 or 100 things originally as was. And the fact that the shirt factory closed in Tennessee was something that never interested anybody in the American elite. And so one factory closes, another factory closes, then the city has no factories, then the population, some of it leaves, some of it remain, and they become drug addicts or in so forth. So and that is why he chose Vance as vice president, because he is the exemplar of a product of a town that was full of people who worked, who sent their children to college, who went to church and these other things, and then became half abandoned, and the remaining population, drug addicts, including the mother of the vice president, Vance. So,
Hilly-billy energy.
What?
Hilly-billy energy.
Correct. So, reindustrialization is achieved in two different ways. One is by simply putting a tariff barrier. The tariff barrier does not help you if there's no industry at all, but it does help you if there's still a surviving, struggling industry. A case in point, US Steel. US Steel still exists, still makes steel, but it has to have a tariff barrier, otherwise cheap Chinese steel comes. So you put a tariff barrier. Now, the other way you do it is the Tesla example, that you're producing something traditional like automobiles, but you beat the competition not by the tariff barrier, but by having new technology. So you make handkerchiefs, but you make it with new technology. One of the two. And it doesn't matter from Trump's point of view, so long as you reindustrialize America. Now, in regard to some industries, And the most dramatic example is shipbuilding industry. Unless America rebuilds the industry, shipbuilding, civilian shipbuilding, the US Navy cannot get ships because you cannot produce ships just from the jewelry shop of the American Naval Sea Systems Command, which is a perfectionist cult that they spend $5 billion to convert the aircraft carrier from perfect steam catapults to a new electrostatic thing. They spent $5 billion. They took them 5 years, and it still doesn't work correctly today. But if you don't have a normal shipbuilding industry, what you have tinkerers and hobbyists and all these people making warships. So that is the center of everything. Now, in regard to a place like the Middle East, Trump has a problem. He has a small problem and a big problem. The small problem is that, like everybody else, like every retired general in Israel and every politician, he wants to stop the Gaza war. It's a very annoying war. It doesn't come to be to anything. And maybe it'll happen, maybe not, and all that stuff. And the other thing he has to do, he has to stop the Iranians getting a nuclear weapon. He actually learned about nuclear weapons because he picked up the Korean thing. When he was president the first time, Kim Jong-un decided to really threaten South Korea. And there was talk, and people forget, that there was a lot of talk about nuclear weapons and the threat. So what Trump did, he just went there. And he called him up and said, listen, I want to visit you. You look, very interested. And he came with a whole booklet. The Gaza Beach booklet was born in North Korea because he came with a booklet showing how North Korea would look if he becomes a friend of the United States. And it included a beach resort. And that beach resort in that book reappeared for Gaza with the same exact pictures. So Trump's idea is about the nuclear weapon. Now, there was a seminar today in which at Bar-Ilan University where people presented data and information about this nuclear project, in which they carefully listed the units which have been moved into the Diego Garcia base area. This being the U.S. base. Now, there they have received B-2s that came from the usual track via Guam. They came, and also they have the B-52s, which are based in Lakenheath in England, and for them from Lakenheath to Iran it's a slow trip because the B-52 is actually flying slightly slower than Ryanair, which flies slower than most airlines to save fuel. So B-52s take a longer time, but they certainly are comfortable with their thing. And so he sends the B-2s, he sends the B-52s. But in the briefing that we got at Bar-Ilan by a real expert, he listed other munitions that have been sent, which are rather interesting. There are sort of palletized forms of bombardment missiles and so on. So a whole range of things, which
Does it include the Moab?
the Moab is B-52. They don't use the B-2 for the Moab. The Moab is more delicate things like going to a patisserie and you get some little sweets. The B-52 is the Moab, because and now the Moab in Iran, as everybody in Jerusalem certainly knows, the Moab basically has one target, and that is the centrifuge, Natanz centrifuge, and Fordo, both of them, albeit for different targeting. Fordo is for the entrance, the whole face of Fordo, the whole entrance, so that everything inside continues as before, except they can't get in and can't get out. In Natanz's case, there is also Moab. because, but there it is, you know, on the roof. You know, it used to be in the old nuclear days, is that don't be so fancy, 10 kiloton on the roof does it every time. In other words, precision was, you know, much more important. So, and then there's all these other stuff. Now, Trump's proposal to them is, I actually, you know, I want to win a Nobel Prize for Peace, and if I bomb you, I probably won't get it. So why don't you stop? And then we'll all be friends. Now, in the past, the Iranians were able to play the usual game, which is that now, right now, the Pezeshkian, the prime minister, who, as you know, is an Azeri, he actually tells people that he is a Turk, but he doesn't mean Erdogani Turk, and it's another kind of stuff. But he's a very nice man who won election as president by promising to negotiate with the United States in order to reduce sanctions. And then there is this other guy called Khamenei who controls all the guns, who says that negotiating with the United States is humiliating and useless, and that they will never agree to anything and they won't keep anything. And so they're setting up a situation where there is an incentive for foreigners to be nice, to support Pezeshkian by negotiating in a nice way with Pezeshkian and offering to lift the sanctions and so on. So Pezeshkian, the nice guy, will win against the bad guy, Khamenei. So it's a good policeman, bad policeman thing being done by them. And this will not work with Trump. That's clear. It will not work with Trump. Now, neither will the US ever consider the possibility of involving the International Atomic Energy Commission. That, paradoxically, is not because Mr. Grossi, who's been doing it, is a bad guy, but because he's a good guy, because all his reports prove that his predecessors allowed the International Atomic Energy Commission to be an alibi, and he does not, as you know. And he is made it very clear that the Iranians allow him to see everything in Iran except the Parchim base area, which the Israeli Air Force has recently visited, because there's also the rocket fuel mixing plant there in one of those split buildings. Now, the buildup in Diego Garcia is such that if it were launched, it would destroy a lot of other things as well. Some of them are because of the US Air Force neurosis that when you bomb a country, you have to destroy every single anti-aircraft system in that country. When the original Bush went to the Air Force, US Air Force, and said, how many sorties do you need to shut down the Iranians? The answer was 20,000 sorties, and it would take 2 months. Why? Because they start with every single fighter aircraft, even if it's in disrepair. That's on the target list. Every single anti-aircraft missile, even if mice have already eaten the wiring of it. No, you know, really, they fanatically insist on that. They also fanatically insist in having a complete rescue system package with the helicopter thing in case one of these pilots falls. They also insist on the suppression of enemy air defenses to include every single radar, even the model 1948 British radar, which is actually now in Tehran airport, which hasn't worked for 40 years. And not to speak of things like F-14s without engines. Everything must be destroyed. That's the US Air Force doctrine. And that is the purpose of that is that if you join the US Air Force as a pilot, you should fly safer than the passengers on most third world airlines. That is the basic. You should be a pilot, but you should be very safe. That kind of nonsense doesn't work with Trump. What Trump allowed them to do was to send a lot of stuff to Diego, which is you listed very efficiently, palletized forms of bombardment missiles and all kinds of stuff. But actually, obviously, they can really do it. And the target list is the full target list. That is to say, there is the Arak reactor, which is the plutonium path, which is not terribly realistic, but is still going to get knocked out. And the two centrifuge plants, the separation plant in Isfahan, which, as you know, is rather inconveniently located if you wish to bomb a place without causing women and children to die because of the place they put it, for that very idea, that dealing with other presidents that would prevent them from bombing.
We can use our precedent when we attacked all kinds of targets in Beirut that cannot be evacuated. We tell taken to another place. We tell the people, look, we're going to bomb and move away.
That's right. But in this case, it would definitely work, so long as you, communicate that. But it doesn't. That is separation plant. Separation plant, as far as I know, and I could very well be wrong, is the separation plant that produces all the uranium hexafluoride, which is used in all the centrifuge system. Now, I could simply be wrong about that. They also, something not on the target list, the last time I saw it, is the Yellow Cake facility, because the Yellow Cake facility is a bit on the elementary side. So that is the one thing you can rebuild quickly, okay? But the hexafluoride plant, you can't. The uranium hexafluoride plant in Isfahan is highly significant. For one thing, it costs a hell of a lot of money because, they still use the platinum thing to this day on it. So it's a full target list. In the case of Fordow, I'm sure that you're aware of the fact in the case of Fordow, there's no point of trying even to destroy it top down. So what you're doing is you're preventing entry and exit. And of course, anything flammable, but they will have to use not just the bombs, they'll have to fire horizontal missiles. In that cargo list that you presented, Diego, that's included. Which is doing a lot of shooting there. Now, I met with the chief of the Air Force, and I told the chief of the Air Force that you have to see this as the Trump administration contribution to your training budget. Because, no, I mean, seriously, they have an issue, some of the munitions that they use are very expensive munitions, and using dummies is not the same thing. So, that's on it. So anyway, all of this long story is to tell you that Trump has presented an ultimatum to them, which is we want to be frank, but we want to negotiate and so on. But your negotiation has to be the procedures whereby U.S. inspectors, not International Atomic Energy inspectors, are satisfied that enough work has been done by bulldozers and so on, destruction of facility, complete destruction of facility, which involves, of course, the throwing away of a vast investment, which is part of the reason why in Iran, even salaried people are going hungry on account of the price rise, which is measured every day through the value of the rial. Because every time the real falls, the prices go up and so forth. So you have to have a whole series of calculations that now, the only problem with this scheme is that Ayatollah Khamenei is not a businessman kind of person. He appears to believe that there is the 14th, the 12th Imam, who is alive and well, might be summoned up if he were given an incentive to come to Earth and save humanity as the Mahdi, if the Iranian regime does something that rises his enthusiasm kind of thing. And there's a subset in the Mahdist community. The Mahdist community, by the way, many of them are not actually clerics people. They're called eulogic eulogists. They are the people who are hired to make speeches at funerals and at things, who are spinning the Shia story. They're the ones who add details like in Qom, there's the Jankaran well, and the people can go there and appeal for the 12th Imam to come out. There are other people, of course, in Iran who don't believe that he's in the Jankaran well, but they do. The eulogists who are now preaching in the cities of the northernmost Azeri area about how it's their duty to save the Shia of Azerbaijan, who are now oppressed, according to them. So in other words, there's a whole turmoil here. And the decision that Ayatollah Khamenei is supposed to make is to allow American inspectors to come in and then predispose demolition plans to destroy everything. Everything. Not just Parchim or something like that, but the basis of the program, which is Natanz, Bordeaux, and so on. So that is very heavy duty. That is, it's a lot to demand from our Iranian friends. But President Trump is definitely not going to sit down and sign another JPOA, another fanciful regime like that. And Grossi has been a priceless resource because Grossi's particular successive notifications have highlighted how the International Atomic Energy Authority was cooperating with the Obama administration. So the Obama administration lied about what they signed on. The actual negotiators were not Kerry with that woman, the Jewish State Department undersecretary. Yeah, it was a beautiful hairstyle, excellent hairstyle. Wendy Sherman and Kerry, they were enjoying the Lake Geneva. The real negotiations were done by Sullivan and Burns, and that's where the giveaways were all done, including, for example, that the heavy water from Iraq was not sent to Kazakhstan, which was the original proposal because they have the big nuclear facilities. It was sent to Oman. And it was not guarded by somebody else. It was guarded by Revolutionary Guards in Oman. So they could have sent back the water to Iraq in 12 hours. I mean, something like that. So Sullivan and Burns made that agreement. They're the ones who provided the shrink-wrapped dollar bills. They're the ones who made all the concessions. And about Sullivan, who is a very nice, sweet man, very beautiful, friendly, handsome sort of young man, is that I was at the Pentagon, where I'm supposed to go very often, but I go rarely because I'm lazy. And I went to see, I was in the office of the Secretary of Defense, which is known as the immediate office of the Secretary of Defense, which is on the E-ring, but Austin stops me, and I thought he said, Edward, you're not allowed to use my bathroom. Instead, he says, Sullivan was here. Now, first, he has no reason to be there because they have a box, they can talk from the White House to SecDef and say, something. He was here. And the way he talked.
Worst case, they have signal.
What?
In the worst case, they can speak on signal.
Yeah, of course. But he says, the way he talked about the Israelis not bombing Iran, I think he has relatives in Tehran. Told me that. And he must have relatives in Tehran. Because the way he came agitated, don't get, the Israelis listen to you. Get them not to do anything. And Austin was saying, I thought he has relatives in Tehran. You remember Austin was a regular American officer, except that he happened to command Central Command.
Right.
So what happened when he was in Central Command is that he was dealing with a lot of different countries, and most of them came to the meetings wearing sheets because they have no time to get dressed because they have so many wives, they have no time to get dressed, so they just wrap the sheet and they come. That's Austin. That's what he said. They come wearing sheets, and he said it's not true what they say against me that I sort of like the Israelis, not true at all. He said, I'm a military man, and they came wearing uniforms, and there's all a lot came wearing shirts. So Austin is, he's a tough guy. Seriously a tough guy. You remember he was ill and he didn't tell anybody, and he told his staff, "Don't tell those idiots in the White House," and all that stuff. So very interesting overall picture. But now there is a different guy there who's Secretary of Defense, Hexet. And Hexet is a guy who's highly allergic to a lot of things like counterinsurgency warfare, nation building, and not just women and stuff. No, I mean, he's seriously allergic. In a way, he's like a lot of military people in Israel today who are preaching the return to the basics, just as here, which is we forgot about, we were talking about high tech and super high tech and this and that, and we forgot about here, Totchanim, V'Shiryan. Yeah, I mean, here, Totchanim, V'Shiryan, because it's so high tech, which is, by the way, a global disease, because I don't know if you remember, but Gerasimov made a speech about the art, how you win wars, and you do it politically, and then by political warfare, then you do by cyber and all that bullshit, and he never mentioned infantry, artillery, and
And look what happened to
armor.
them.
Exactly what happened to them. Exactly happened to them. So Trump does not want to have a war at all. He promised people that he would not have wars. That what he actually promised, I won't have stupid wars like Afghanistan and so on. I'm not going to do national building. I'm not going to do that. But the fact is that he really doesn't want to have a war. But Ayatollah Khamenei, if Ayatollah Khamenei signs off and on the demolition of this nuclear program, I do not consider in any way an expert on Iran, but I don't believe that he can do it. That is, he will never actually make that decision. He will never give that order, and so on. And the president, who is an interesting guy, because he is, as he keeps saying, Turk, but he was actually brought up in the only city in Iran where the Kurds have something of a cultural presence. It's let's call it the Kurdish cultural capital in Iran. That's what is actually Kurdish. That's really his more education, even though his own family happened to be Azeri in there. So this guy did campaign specifically on having talks with the Americans, so the sanctions will be removed. Now, when he so campaigned, he assumed that the American president would be Kamala Harris. Kamala Harris. And then he believed that with Kamala Harris, with people like Sullivan and so on, he would be able to reach an agreement where the Iranians would pretend to have given up their nuclear ambition by quoting the fatwa. The fatwa is like, my maiden aunt promised that she would, get married after, even though she's 97 years old, kind of thing. So that's not, so at this moment, even though Trump does not want to do it, he's on the track to launch the bombing operation. Although the deployment in Diego is an exaggerated deployment because it implies that he wants to destroy even the foundations and this and that, much more. That is, even the most superficial type of attack, as they define superficial, would destroy the program and would have to be rebuilt from the start. And some of the aspects of it are very hard to rebuild, which is the uranium hexafluoride plant, for example.
It's fun.
Yeah, it's very hard to rebuild because there's all this platinum in it. So anyway, we are the timeline. I believe that everybody has the same timeline, which is 90 days from today. 90 days from today, we're either going to see bombing, or we're going to see things. Now,
Can the Iranians play on time?
well, they can't play on time. They can play on time within the next 60 days at the very least, at the moment, then that's when the bombing begins, because then they have, you see, the mayor of the gun doctrine, and I feel free to talk about it since he's not anymore among us. Mayor of the gun doctrine was you only bomb them when they're about to assemble the machined fissile,
The tool,
material.
the tool,
Yes, until then you don't bomb them.
Weaponization,
Sorry?
the weaponization.
Weaponization in the most specifically mechanical final stage, which means that when you finish it, you can put it on a plane and drop it. Now, for a warhead, well, on top of a missile. If we put it on top of a missile, you don't know if you're going to hit Amman or Tel Aviv. I mean, that's a problem with their missiles, okay? They don't have a special missile for the nuclear weapon. They just have the regular missile, which has got a very high hit or miss. They have launch, a failure to launch, and then you have a problem that if you fail to launch, it's going to explode right where you launched it, which might not be healthy for people there, right? Or it can launch but fail
It's
to
no problem.
reach.
They go directly to paradise. Don't worry about them. Those people that are going to be.
I know that. I mean, I know that. And, I also know there is a better paradise the Catholics have to offer. In fact, one of my plans is if I'm diagnosed with cancer, I will start smoking because I always miss nicotine. And if I die, I'm going to convert to Islam because who knows? Maybe it's true. What the Catholics offer is a lot of singing by angels. Can you imagine after the 2,000 years, he gets tiresome, etc. So anyway, the thing is that the president does not want to give the go order. And then again, the president doesn't want to sit on that order while weaponization takes place. And then they will tell him that you can bomb, but if you do, it might explode. And then it will explode and then you will have caused a nuclear detonation, etc., etc. So, yes, the one thing that Israeli diplomacy can achieve is to tell everybody what the sequencing would be, and to just go unclassified on that and really spell out the sequencing. But we're living in very dramatic times because this decision, if this decision is not made, you are going to get this type of assembly. Although, remember, they do not have any air delivery option. Their missile delivery is no more reliable than I don't know, somebody in Israel knows how many missiles were launched versus how many missiles landed. Because there is the successive failure, boost-based failure.
It was a big ratio of failure.
Yes, but the failure in the sense of how many boost phase.
maybe
I
gold.
don't know, told you.
What? I should have asked Gold.
Gold.
Yeah, there's boost phase failures, which involve having a nuclear weapon bounce right back where it was launched from. Then there is a ascending failure when the boost works, but then the missile does not have the proper trajectory. And then there is, of course, the culmination descent failure when it goes in the wrong country, like Cyprus or Jordan. And finally, there is detonation failure. With a weapon of this kind, there is very high detonation failure possibility unless they undersafe it. In other words, they don't have safety, in which case there's a very high detonation danger if there's a missile failure. So they might launch a missile and the missile everything might work, but it might work over Iran, and an Iranian town, it could happen. If it's a rocket failure, and then you have a detonation right on the spot. If you then have a desensitized detonation, then you have a very high failure rate of non-detonation. So now a nuclear weapon lands and nothing happens. I mean, you have to, after the Manhattan Project and after Hiroshima and Nagasaki, the Americans did not have a bomb that they could use. They had to work years to have a bomb, and years. And when they reduced the diameter because of the Polaris missile system, the bomb that was put on the Polaris wasn't actually working. Polaris got world patrols, so the U.S. Navy can tell the U.S. Air Force that they're a bunch of idiots because the Navy has the patrols, except that the nuclear weapon didn't work because that nuclear weapon was done by Lawrence Livermore Laboratory and not done by the Los Alamos cloud because it wasn't done by all these communists in Los Alamos. It was done by Edward Teller. And Edward Teller promised that he could get the diameter, reduced diameter. And Admiral Burke, the head of the chief of naval operations, but was really the supervisor, and Admiral Rayburn, they believed Teller that he would have the smaller diameter, but he couldn't do it on time. So they had the submarine, the missile, and everything else. So they announced the first patrol, not in order, of course, to intimidate the Russians, but to humiliate the Air Force. They announced the first patrol, and they actually went on the first patrol and a whole sequence of patrols without having anything that could blow up, because Teller didn't deliver on the problem. It's one of the the sins of it. So the Iranians are facing this type of problem. You have the material, you have the critical material.
You don't have the credibility necessary in order to.
No, you don't have the safety yourself. The safety. Remember, at Parchim base, what's the track distance? You all have the secret information here. I don't. Track distance from Parchim to Tehran, to the Khomeini monument in that hollow center of Tehran. What's the distance? Has anybody got a map here?
It's not far away.
Parchim is not far away. If the wind happens to be flowing from west to east, which happens quite a lot in Tehran, then they would get you could have a very serious number of radiation casualties in Tehran.
Well, they had nuclear activity inside Tehran in many places. They are not worried about.
No, but wait a second. The nuclear activity they had was not a half detonated device. What they did was that they kept, material samples and some kind of stuff. They have them everywhere, that kind of nuclear stuff, not just there. But you know what?
But they are risk takers.
Are they risk takers?
Going for nuclear weapons?
Oh, you mean in generic terms? Well, they're definitely risk takers because in that sense that they went for nuclear weapon, except that you might have noticed that the Iranian nuclear program has two characteristics that are different from the one of another Middle East country that I'm aware of. The Middle East country nuclear program was driven by urgency. Time elapsed from the start of the program to having a weapon that you could load on an aircraft for airdrop. Okay.
10 years.
What? How many years goes between 56 and 67?
10 years. It wasn't.
Good. You see, I've never been good at arithmetic.
It wasn't.
So that's a good guess. That's one aspect of it. Secondly, it was a program conducted with extreme economy. Now, extreme economy. I asked Professor Bergman. I happen to know the budget. Okay, I know the budget. So I said to him, how the hell did you manage to do this? This is slightly more than the cost of a bar mitzvah. I mean, almost kind of stuff. And his answer to me was that everybody working in Dimona, they're all serving people. They're, and they're all young and they're very good eyesight. Therefore, we could use the copy paper and make 4 copies and we could use it much more than we would do with, they were using copy paper with the black paper and the white paper, and Bergman's answer was that they have good eyesight, so he could reuse the copy paper, and that's how he managed to stay in the budget. In other words, Professor Bergman's project was an economy project. The Iranian project is marked by gross duplication. You have Natanz and you have Forda. You have the centrifuge separation and you have the reactor plutonium. In other words, they did the program as if they have endless amount of money, which they could have by starving everything, and endless time. Because remember the timing of this. The Professor Bergman's time was 56, 67. The timing these guys have is when would you start? You don't start when the Shah talks about nuclear weapons. You don't start when the Israelis start doing stuff there. You start when they buy the centrifuge package from that thief, the Pakistani thief, whose name is now on many high schools in Pakistan. Many high schools have Iqbal, whatever his name is, so that I asked the Pakistani ambassador to Washington whether the schools are supposed to train thieves. People who steal, they go overseas and steal. And he was offended. He says these were great scientists. Yeah, that's right. Point is, they bought this package from the Pakis. The Paki package was the product of a program of extreme economy. The Paki program was cheap. And it was a linear program that quickly produced the required result. Their program has been incredibly slow, and incredibly with duplication all along the way, triplication. And I don't understand why that is.
Well, we slowed them down a bit.
Now, okay, they had a program that was duplicating and multiplicating and was leisurely slow program, which you slowed down. You did not slow down a fast program. In fact, I actually even remember when there was talk about slowing down the Paki program. That was a fast program. The Iranian program is a very slow program. You wanted to slow a slow program. You want, and I do not understand how, upon having embarked on the course, it tells me that the Iranians half expected to be stopped. That somehow there's something lacking in spirit. And this is not Professor Bergman, who's motivated by extreme economy, but also extreme speed. Speed. You go the straightest road and you do it. And they did not do that. I still don't understand.
I want to, okay, we spoke about the Iranian project for quite a while. I have 2 questions in this respect. Is there, with everything you tell us about the President Trump's determination to do what needs to be done about it, is there any role for Israel there?
Well, that, the people, I would say, sad. I was shocked today by Bar-Ilan University. There was a professor, Bar-Ilan, who kept talking about Mossad and how we killed this and killed that and killed the other. The Israeli Air Force should send a special commando to Boeing, and kill them all. The management, I mean, and not the workers, because as you know, they failed to deliver. You know what happened in 2008? There was a competition for tankers. That competition was won by Airbus. And then Boeing, which has been got rid of many engineers, hired lobbyists instead. You have an army of lobbyists. They send the army of lobbyists, and the Congress forced the Air Force to overrule its own finding and ordered them to recompete. In the recompetition, Airbus won even more.
Yeah.
And then Congress gave it to Boeing. Okay, and then the Israeli Air Force, the US Air Force ordered the tankers, and then the Israeli Air Force ordered the tankers. Then they did not deliver the tankers. They did not deliver the US Air Force tankers, except very, very, very slowly. And the Israeli tankers were not at the head of the queue, so they're not delivered there. So it's a tanker issue. The tankers that were flown these are 707s. They're 65 years old. They're older than the grandmother of the oldest pilot, literally, as airframes. And moreover, they don't have the plane tankage. They only have a barrel in the fuselage with a single tube. You can only refuel one airplane at a time. And if you, assuming that all of them can fly on the same time, which is not the case with 65-year-old machinery usually, then you'll be able to refuel a total of 6 F-15s carrying 2,000-pound bombs, steel jacketed bombs, and that's all you would have. So, I mean, they say, look, this is not fair. I mean, we John Mossad to have a life of adventure. Now you keep asking us to eat the same ice cream, kind of thing. But the Israeli Air Force can bomb the mechanic shop where they assemble the bomb. Because that we know is that kind of construction that they've been parchim, and you just bomb because there was the fuel, the mixer was in that same building. I mean, sorry, that type of construction, and we know that you can destroy it. But you're really, if you're really carrying out the Mer de Gun program of waiting until they're in the middle of assembling it, that's taking it, too far, and I think personally. So the Israeli Air Force could bomb something, but they cannot then prevent them from rebuilding the thing and starting again. The Americans can bomb it so that they're not starting again.
But if the Americans do something, should the Israelis participate as well, or should we just what we do with the Houthis in Yemen? We watch from the veranda. We should eat popcorn.
Okay. Everybody who's bombing in Yemen today is doing symbolic bombing, not real bombing, because to do real bombing, as I'm told by experts, overhead intelligence is not enough. You need horizontal intelligence to identify these type of targets. Looking at roofs doesn't do the job. You need to have people on the ground. And in order for even the very able people to be on the ground, you need years. If it's the US, you will never get them. Because the US has an organization which is called the Old Age Pension Retirement Insurance Company, also known as CIA. And the reason I own several houses in Washington is because when they are unable not to do an operation of any kind, or even a simple one, they give contracts. That's how I know Ziv, because on one of these contracts, I had to borrow people from. So CIA never does anything. When they do, they give it to contractors. And I have earned all the money I've earned, not from the grand strategy of the Byzantine Empire Turkish edition, as you might imagine, but I earned it by doing CIA operations. Why? Because they're unable to do operations. What operations are they unable to do, including the ones that I would do with a couple of kids? Even those they can't do, right? So there's no such option. The American president does not have an operational option. Israel does. Now, in terms of asking the CIA to have operation to do target spotting in Yemen, the first question they're going to ask you is there an embassy in Sana'a? That's the first thing, because if there's no embassy, that would mean that they have to operate in the territory and not without diplomatic cover. Now they have a whole group of officers who are called NOCs, non-official cover officers, and they operate in such places as Paris, Warsaw, at the most. They never send them to Iran and so on. So the United States has many things, but it does not have what you would call a functioning, a functioning service. And I have frequently berated them in meetings where they show up and say to them that as far as I'm concerned, as a taxpayer, I'm outraged that you people only operate out of embassy, except in places like Paris. Because you're supposed to be able to have field capability. And then, they give you, the usual answer they give is you don't know. Actually, we do. And I say, I know you don't, because otherwise you wouldn't have come to me to do these very simple operations, which I did, and, as a kind of part-time fun thing, So I know they don't. And in regard to Iran, for example, I asked specifically, I've been personal friends with some directors, very close person. And one of them, I was kind of friendly, not really a friend at all, not a true friend, but it was a friendly conversation. And I said, Director, I'm a taxpayer. I want to know why you don't function out of embassy, except in places where anybody can, And his answer, he was about to answer me, but then the two guys next to him, one of them is the chief of operations, answered. And his answer was, if you're talking about Iran, Iran is terribly dangerous with all of these militia and this and that. And we tried to send somebody to the island, Fik Island, it's called, and they caught him and killed him. So I said, the guy you sent did not speak English very well. I mean, he had a strong New York accent. So, he knew no Arabic, even though he purported to come from an Arab country. And of course, he knew no Farsi. But you expected him somehow to infiltrate Tehran from that island, which they keep operating for the very purpose of getting foreign currency and giving people a cheap thrill of being in Iran when you're not really in Iran. And that's the guy they caught. If this is your example of failure. So, I was in Baku, Azerbaijan, so I decided to see if I could cross the border, and I did. And I had photographs taken of crossing the border, and I come back and show this to Pompeo, and Pompeo keeps asking, who's the girl? Who's the girl? I said, forget about the girl. I said, it's me and the girl, and I showed him the photograph. And why? Because they're trucks,
Yeah,
the trucks. You're familiar with it.
yeah, but sure, what's his name? Reuel did this also.
Sorry?
Reuel Gerecht.
You mean Rail Geret?
Yeah.
Yeah, because there is the main crossing of the good Persians who go to Baku to drink vodka and eat the vandalistically caught caviar caught on the wrong side of the Caspian, which you're not allowed to do. And you're going along the Caspian shore, and there is a big concrete structure with holes in it, and they have customs people and all that kind of stuff. There is another crossing, which is on the way to, let's call it Nakhichevan, whatever, and you come to a certain crossing where the truck drivers are crossing. They're going to Mahachkala, the capital of Dagestan, to deliver fruits and vegetables at low cost in the Aeroflot domestic freight. And they cross the border, but they're not refrigerated. So therefore, they can't stop. And they certainly can't stop in a typical border queue of trucks because everything would rot. So what they do is that they give a rolled newspaper to the customs guy when they pass, in which they do put a printout of the truck. with the number and everything else. And then they put some banknotes on it. So I was awaiting the other side with my assistant, and I started talking to the truck drivers. I had a bottle of vodka in my hand. Only one of them, people said, no, I don't drink vodka. One of them took the vodka, and he was a guest Arbeiter in Germany. And he was an old guy, many years before, but he spoke some German. And I said, listen, I want to go to Tabriz. I just want to see the bazaar. Then I want to come back. He said, yeah, well, I can do that, but then you have to come back with my son. Because when I come back from this long trip, I rest, my son goes back. So I said, what's wrong with your son? He smokes. And, he smokes. He won't stop smoking. And, people like you don't smoke. So I said, I love smoking. So me and the girl went aboard the truck. We went all the way to Tabriz. I went to the bazaar and we came back with the son. And of course, she took photographs, naturally. And because she's Japanese, they take photographs. So I come back and I showed them. And Pompeo says, I can't believe this, and all that kind of stuff. And I said, all you have to do is to empty out the building, fumigate it to make sure, like insects, and then restaff it with young Americans who are interested in foreign countries and even speak a language or two, and fire them all. But Pompeo, instead of doing that, became Secretary of State. Now, the new director of CIA, who is a sensible fellow, said, Edward, don't go. I am not, you're an extremist. I'm not. I'm just going to invite them to leave. He invited every employee of the Langley, every employee, to leave and benefit from pay until September and all benefits and everything else. That's what he did for me. And now, when enough people leave, then they will be able to restaff it. And then they're going to get young Americans who have been abroad, had met some people, had some adventures and so on. Because the previous regime was centered on security process, where they asked people to, they have to specify who they met every day of their life and who they were and all that kind of stuff. And with such a security procedure, you end up hiring only people born in Utah, married a woman from Utah, went to Utah College, then they went to Salt Lake City, whatever, and then they arrived straight from Utah to Langley. And in Langley, they're supposed to teach them how to operate overseas. So that was the procedure they followed. And this ensured that they had no undercover capability except for these people whom they called knocks, and who many of them are high morale people when they start, because they really do want to. Plenty of people would like to be the real thing. But then they discovered that the layers of management, of how they're forbidden to do whatever happens to work, they're not allowed to do, and then they typically get disappointed and they leave and all that stuff. The good ones, the bad ones stay.
Can I question the perseverance of President Trump in this thing?
The President Trump,
Particularly knowing
no, let
what
me tell
happened in
you,
Korea.
it's a very fair question. What happened in Korea was that in Korea, he learned that once the country has nuclear weapons, you cannot get rid of them. That's what he learned in Korea. And he is entering this negotiation with that knowledge, which is you have to stop them. If you don't stop them, you'll have to live with them having nuclear weapons. And that, what?
Which is unacceptable.
Which is unacceptable, okay? Now, that's come where I can't talk with strategic matters myself because I have a skin disease which acts up whenever I'm within 50 meters of derma. I get some kind of, irritation. And that's the problem. And he's the Minister of Strategic Affairs, and he's supposed to be the strategist, right? And I wrote a book called Strategy, which chapter 1 says, don't be derma. So, it's called The Logic of Strategy and all that stuff. So the problem, the thing, there's a real issue here. You're serious business. Serious business what does Trump know? From North Korea, he learned that once they have nuclear weapons, they won't give them up. And he also learns, of course, a very important thing is that all of the usual incentives don't work with the very kind of regime that you're trying to use it with. Like going to Ayatollah Khamenei and, promise him that you'll allow him to invite him to Texas for a good old pork barbecue kind of thing. He's not going to go for it. He learned that. Okay? He knows that. And he also knows that they must not have nuclear weapons. And he really has absorbed it. But if I were an Israeli citizen, what I would do is that I would try to do some kind of low impact compromise kind of thing, meaning that Israel takes off, it gets refueled by KCRs, not the 65-year-old Israeli tankers, but the 65-year-old US tankers, because they were built to be tankers at least. They were not built to be El Al passenger airplanes. In other words, it would be a very good thing if Israel did actually do the bombing with tanker support. If as a contingency action, but not coordinated contingency action. So if the president, for whatever presidential reasons, decides not to give the go, he gives the go to the tankers, which is, of course, a high burden. It's a very complicated and difficult thing to do, but this is how you rescue the Israeli option. Because in my view, it would be irresponsible to do the operation with the capabilities that were shown when the airstrike took place. It was a very nice airstrike. Everybody was very impressed with it. The use of the F-16 was particularly dramatic because the F-16 is a short-range system, unrefueled, and you have this very clever ballistic, missile that extended the range.
Air-launched.
I mean, you extend the range by having ballistic missile that then glides. There's all this wonderful stuff, but actually, that's not the way to go. The way to go is to dump the bombs on and flatten the whole of Parchin. So you're sure, even if all your intelligence is wrong and you got the wrong building, you destroyed the facility. And then there are other locations which I should not talk about in this gathering of innocent students and so on.
Just one short question because we have to finish. You also wrote about the coup d'etat. Is there any chance of getting rid of this Iranian regime by anybody?
Okay,
By the messaging?
so they are terminally unpopular. However, the opponents of the regime are people who, culturally speaking, when they have a huge demonstration, instead of killing policemen, which is what you're supposed to do, they take pictures of each other. Okay? I mean, seriously, when a handful of Basij arrived with scooters, the crowd did not rush towards them, flatten them, break their heads, their skulls against the pavement. They did not. They just took pictures. So I count the opposition's physical kinetic capability at 0. Okay? Not one. I don't believe that. Secondly, the old army, not the Revolutionary Guards, but the old army, which has been underfunded, neglected, and everything else, should hate them. I know that the old Navy certainly hated the Pasdaran boats, people. But there's multiple problems about expecting them to do anything, because anybody who has any potential was lured away and transferred to, at the price of growing a beard, you have a much higher income. So that doesn't work either. So I'm skeptical about it. Now, they themselves, as you know, say that since the Mossad apparently kills people before breakfast without effortlessly, if you kill Khamenei for us, if you kill Khamenei, you could start the revolutionary process. And the problem with killing Khamenei is that Khamenei knows that you're trying to kill him, so it doesn't stay in his official palace and so on. And he doesn't even stay in the Revolutionary Guard guest house, made
It's
especially
dangerous.
for VIP people, even though it's within his perimeter. I saw that guest house. I saw it. It's quite a guest house. But what I'm saying is that
Not to build on the coup d'etat, you said.
the coup d'etat should be done by military people. And I don't see them doing it. They're being beaten up, they're being sidelined, they're being underfunded, they're being humiliated and pushed aside by Revolutionary Guards, many of whom were themselves military and grew a beard to get more action, more power. I don't see. I say that as a possibility that might happen even tonight, but it's not a possibility you can engineer or.
Counter.
No, it's not really an option. The options are either you flatten them or you live with the bomb.
One quick question. To what extent the fears and queasiness of the Gulfies can be a factor in
Okay.
the American decision?
Right. I do not believe that President Trump takes advice from Saudis,
Mhm.
let alone Emiratis and so on, not to speak of Qatar. I'm actually personally very offended with Qatar because not only I've dealt with them, but I even went there and they never offered to bribe me. I was waiting there.
You're the only one.
Yeah.
Like we're complaining about the Russians, right?
Yes,
The
it
laws
does,
that never
yeah.
came his way.
I was in Qatar, so they invited me. So I go to the meeting, I even met the ruler and all that stuff, and I was waiting for the bribery offer, to which I would, I would have the option,
I'll
or
talk to
either,
Jay.
or at
I'll
least
talk
have
to
the
Jay
option.
next time.
Sorry?
I'll talk to Jay next time.
Yes? No, but who are the two employees of Bibi who did take the money?
We don't know that they took the money. Come on.
I know they took the money, so you can assume he took the money. But what I don't know is how do the investigators are so sure they took the money? Unless it was a situation where, they were exposed. I mean, there are people in the world who are willing to shoot, to kill people, but they're not willing to take a bribe. They exist, strangely enough. But they don't include all the staff of Bibi Netanyahu, as I understand it,
So thank you very much. We have to finish the open part of our meeting and
So now we can talk about the real things.
now we should be able to.
Get rid of all these people.
Yes, I think for everybody it was extremely interesting and really a lot of stories and grand strategy and
Yeah.
all mixed up. Really, thank you very much for sharing all this knowledge with
Well,
us.
strategy has many levels,
Yeah.
grand strategy, theater strategy, operations, tactics.
Tactical and
So,
technical.
even the technical.
Probably the most.
Yes, that's right.
Thank you very much.